Well, thank you, Brandon. God bless the great state of Texas. Let me say what an honor and privilege it is to be with each of you tonight. Thank you for inviting me to join you. Thank you for letting me be with you, be with your families, be with your kids. It is great to be together. You know, you can learn a lot about a word by studying its history, studying its roots. You look at the word politics. It has two parts. Poly, meaning many, and ticks, meaning blood-sucking parasites. And that is a fairly accurate description of Washington, D.C. But let me tell you, what y'all do every day is much, much more important than politics. I'm standing here today in the presence of heroes. I am humbled, I am honored to stand in your presence. The first and most important thing I want to say to everyone here is thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for answering the call. Thank you for standing up and saying, I will defend our nation. Thank you for going out on cold and lonely nights. Thank you for going out in the blazing heat. Thank you for going head-to-head with drug cartels. Thank you for doing a job where far too often you don't feel appreciated. Where far too often political players in this country treat the job that you're doing as almost a nuisance. And thank you for waking up every day not being deterred by that, not being discouraged by that, or if you are discouraged, going through that discouragement and doing your duty, serving this country. You are keeping the great state of Texas and you are keeping the United States of America safe. And I am privileged to stand here to break bread with you and to say thank you. You know, it's striking. Conversations I've had tonight, the men and women gathered here, the conversations I've had over and over and over again, sitting down with Border Patrol agents all along the border of the state of Texas. Consistently, the concerns I hear are you want to be able to do your job. You want this country finally to get our act together and get serious about securing the border. And let me tell you, in that, I salute you. And I am doing each and every day in Washington everything I can do to fight to make that happen. I think there are three things in particular we need to do a much better job of. Number one, we need to stand with the men and women of the Border Patrol. You know, early last year, I was down in the Rio Grande sector, down in the valley, joined the midnight muster of Border Patrol agents. 100+ agents gathered in a room. We just went out to listen, to say, all right, tell me what's going on the ground, what's working well, what's not working well. One of the things I try to do a lot of in this job serving as senator, spend a lot of time listening to Texans and hearing what's effective, what's not. One of the most passionate concerns I heard expressed in that midnight muster was agent after agent who said, when we're assaulted in the field, when a trafficker, when a coyote, when an illegal alien physically assaults an agent, throws a punch at us, throws a rock at us, does something else to physically assault us, far too often, those cases aren't being prosecuted. Far too often, we're told it's not worth the investment of prosecutorial time and energy to bring that case to justice. Now, I can tell you what I told the men and women, the Rio Grande Valley sector that night, which is, in my view, if anyone physically assaults a federal law enforcement officer, that person should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That's the message that I have conveyed emphatically to the Attorney General. I have conveyed emphatically to the U.S. attorneys that are now on the ground in Texas. And I've conveyed emphatically throughout the executive branch. The feedback that I've gotten from agents is that's gotten much, much better. But let me say, if it ever doesn't get better, if we're ever at the point again where people are physically assaulting agents and those cases are not being prosecuted, let me know. Let my team know, because I'll tell you what I've tried to do every day in the Senate is each and every day have your back. You know, that same night I went out on midnight patrol with the agents. Just a small slice of seeing what you guys do every day, every night. We're out there. There were a number of instances where the agents apprehended people coming over illegally, apprehended a stash out. We're off in the thick brush, apprehending aliens. Now, I will say I do have one minor complaint, which is we're walking through the brush with who knows what traffickers, who knows what aliens there, and the agents who are with me, they're going, "Senator, Senator, come over here, come over here." I'm like, ixnay on the editor's side. I don't really need a bullseye on me, thank you. You know, we're standing by this stash house. They're like, we don't know who's going in, but we're going to kick the door in, and they're all calling me senator. I'm looking around and going, I don't know who the senator guy is. That guy over there, wow. So, even that brief involvement, just saying what you guys do, it's not an easy job. Part of what we need to do is also celebrate. Celebrate the heroism of the men and women in this room. Celebrate the heroism of agents who risked their lives. Celebrate the sacrifice of agents who've lost their lives. That's something I've tried to do in the Senate. That's something we need to do collectively a much better job. But the second thing we need to do is we need to do everything humanly possible to finally secure the border. Now, what does that mean? I recognize I'm standing in a room with people who are dealing with this every day. For me to stand here and suggest how to do that is a bit much. But I will say I've spent a lot of time listening to you guys, and let me tell you what I've heard from you. Are the tools and pieces you need. Number one, build a wall. A wall is useful. You know, it's interesting. Every time I'm down on the border, I ask folks, look, there's obviously a lot of politics, a lot of noise about a wall. I ask agents, is a wall helpful? You tell me. Every time I've had that conversation, and it's been dozens of times, the answer I consistently get from your members is yes, a wall is helpful. It's not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. You know, they brought up the old line, if you build a 15-foot wall, you get people with a 16-foot ladder. They said, you know what, that's true. We got people crossing carrying ladders. But as y'all appreciate, one of the critical pieces to securing the border is the time between detection and apprehension. Slowing them down long enough so that when you know someone's crossing illegally, you have time for agents to get there and catch them. And what I've heard consistently is a wall slows them down. It's not easy to ride a boat or run carrying a ladder. It's not easy to climb a wall, and that slows the whole process down, gives us time to intersect. But a wall is not remotely the end of the solution. In addition to walls and physical barriers, we need technology. We need infrared, we need cameras, we need motion detectors. I've introduced legislation in the Senate to increase fourfold the investments in technology, increase the investment in all of the tools that y'all ought to have, and that includes aircraft, both fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft. The Border Patrol ought to have a far more extensive availability of tools. You know, down at the Texas border, I went up in a plane owned by the Texas DPS, Department of Public Safety. It's a beautiful plane, has fabulous technology. We're up in the air, 6-8 miles away. You're looking at infrared on the southern side of the river. You could spot, when I was there, it was a group of 5 or 6 aliens on the other side of the river, guys standing 20 or 30 feet away who was the scout. And the DPS calls in, the Border Patrol says, okay, here's where they are. We can see the trucks pull up on our side, just wait for them to cross. It's fabulous technology. And let me ask you, why on earth is it the case that the state of Texas, the DPS, has better technology than the Federal Border Patrol? As much as I am a passionate Texan, that's crazy. That's not right. I'm grateful the state of Texas is stepping in and helping and providing assistance, but y'all ought to have those resources. Y'all ought to have that technology. We ought to have drones in the air. We ought to have virtual fences augmenting physical barriers so that you know ahead of time when there's movement and you can deploy resources there. But it's not just technology, it's not just physical barriers. The most consistent answer I hear from each of you is the most important piece to stopping illegal immigration is boots on the ground. That everything else pales in comparison to boots on the ground. For a long time, I have advocated tripling the Border Patrol. I hope the next time I'm in this room, it has to be 3 times as big. Because y'all are 3 times as big. If we want to solve this problem, we got to have men and women on the ground in a position to intercept people crossing illegally. And by the way, part of being on the ground means that we don't want to have our agents sitting in the back office doing paperwork. We don't want to have our agents sitting there doing processing. We don't want to have our agents sitting in the motor vehicle shop dealing with vehicles all day long. The men and women of the Border Patrol, y'all sign up because you want to be in the field stopping people from crossing illegally, and we need to be doing everything possible to get as many agents as possible in the field actually able to do your job. Not only that, there are other tools we need to be using. As you know, more than half of the people in the country illegally overstay their visas. Come in legally on a visa and just never leave. For years, federal law has required a biometric exit-entry system so that we know who comes in and we know if you haven't left. We need to enforce that. So that anyone who overstays that visa, we know precisely they haven't left. Not only that, the magnet we have here is work. People come because they can get a job. We need to have a strong E-Verify system so that no one can get employment without running a reliable check on their immigration status. If people discover coming over here that they can't get employment if they're here illegally, the magnet to come to this country drops dramatically. When it comes to threats, as you know, far too many of the aliens coming in have criminal backgrounds. We need to be much more serious in dealing with that. One of the things we need to do is pass case law. I authored case law in the United States Senate. Case law, as you know, was named for Kate Steinle. Beautiful young woman, 28 years old in California, on the pier with her dad, shot by an illegal alien. An alien who had been deported over and over and over again. An alien who had been imprisoned over and over and over again with multiple felonies, one after the other after the other. And yet the revolving door of our system, he kept being released. Case law provides that any aggravated felon who repeatedly enters the country faces a mandatory minimum prison sentence. If case law had been on the books, that illegal alien, instead of being on that pier, murdering Kate Steinle, would have been in a federal prison incarcerated. I've gotten to know Kate Steinle's family. The last words she said to her dad as he held her in his arms, dying, were, "Help me, Dad." Every one of us who's a father or mother, there's no greater nightmare than to imagine holding your baby girl, holding your son, as life slips away from you. And I got to ask you, why is this a partisan issue? Why is this a political issue? The reality, something like Kate's Law, which 80 to 90% of Americans support. You get outside of Washington, D.C., it actually doesn't matter what party you're in, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian. Kate's Law is something everyone supports in Washington, outside of Washington. But in Washington, you face a Democratic filibuster. Even on common sense legislation focused on violent criminals. Another piece of this is sanctuary cities. Far too many jurisdictions you have openly defying federal law, saying we refuse to recognize federal immigration law. Our jurisdiction is a sanctuary. Our law enforcement won't cooperate with Border Patrol, won't cooperate with ICE. That's lawless. The essence of rule of law is that we enforce the laws and laws. We need to be defunding the sanctuary cities. And if you look at the battles we see playing out, we see local elected officials notifying illegal aliens of raids before they occur. What on earth is going on? Not only that, we need to end catch and release. Let me say, I cannot imagine how frustrating it is for the men and women here, for Border Patrol agents across this country, that you're out in a hostile environment, you're risking your life, you don't know if you're going to get shot that night. You apprehend someone at great risk to yourself, you take them in, and you see them processed, turned around and released with answers. That's got to be unbelievably hard to get up the next morning and go do it again. You got to ask yourself, why am I doing this? If the folks I'm apprehending just turn around and get let right out, but hey, they get given a court paper to say, a year or two, show up for your court date. And it is only Washington politicians who think anyone's actually going to show up for that court date. Catch and release is wrong, and we need to end it. Third, we need to stop talking about these policies and actually implement it. So how do we get that done? There are a lot of pieces to implementing these policies. Number one, a great many of them can be done on the executive side. Can be done through the President, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Border Patrol, changing their policies. You want to end catch and release, begin working with GSA to lease new detention facilities. And as a matter of policy, stop letting people go. And what y'all understand also is as long as you do catch and release, you have a magnet. You guys know during the Obama administration, Border Patrol did a study of people coming, unaccompanied minors coming, asked, why are you coming? The vast majority of them said they were coming because they'd get up at a missile. That all they had to do was get to U.S. soil and they'd get permission to stay. Well, you know what? Every time someone crosses over, gets caught and released, they're picking up the phone and they're calling their friends and neighbors back home and saying, guess what? All you have to do is get here and you can stay. And let me say, you see a lot of rhetoric, a lot of politics, where politicians say, you gotta be compassionate. But you guys understand, the people trafficking in the drugs, the people trafficking in human beings, men, women, boys, and girls, They're not well-meaning social workers with beards and Birkenstocks out hugging trees. These guys are vicious, transnational drug cartels. And the horror of what's happening with unaccompanied minors is far too many of these little girls and little boys are being sexually assaulted, are being physically assaulted. When you visit with landowners in South Texas who periodically find on their land, on their ranches, dead bodies, abandoned by the coyotes, pregnant women, abandoned to die. Nobody who cares about compassion would want to see a system where you're incentivizing illegal immigration. Nobody who cares about compassion or humanity would want to incentivize a system where parents are making the horrific choice to hand their little girl, hand their little boy off to a coyote or cartel and be subjected to the horrific abuse. When the unaccompanied minors were coming in a few years ago, I visited with some of the HHS officials who were dealing with them here in Texas. They described encountering kids who the smugglers had put a gun to their head and forced to cut off the fingers or ears of other kids. And they then mailed those fingers and ears back to the parents of those children to extract even more money from the parents who'd already paid them to smuggle their kids into the United States. And this HHS worker described dealing with, number one, children who are horribly, physically mutilated, have been through this trauma. But number two, other kids with the incredible psychological and emotional trauma of having been forced to carry this out on another kid. That is not humane, that is not compassionate. And we shouldn't be incentivizing. On the executive side, we need to be implementing policies that enforce our laws. Listen, as everyone here knows, first 6 months of the Trump administration, we saw illegal crossings plummet. Nearly 70%. That's staggering. And when I went down to the border, when I asked agents, I said, why are the numbers going down? I said, look, the wall hadn't been built. Y'all don't have more agents. What's changed? The answer I was told was, well, the difference is the cartels and the coyotes believe there's an administration that will enforce the law. That's what's changed. Now, I want you to think about 2 years ago. If in the summer or fall of 2016, someone were to stand up on the national stage and say, all we need is a president and an executive willing to enforce the law, and with that alone, illegal immigration will drop 70%. You'd have been laughed off the stage. The national media would have found that a ridiculous claim. And yet that's exactly what happened. If the story ended there, we'd have a lot to celebrate. But unfortunately, what you guys know is the story didn't end there. And when the cartel saw that catch and release has been continued, the numbers of illegal crossings continue to climb and climb and climb and climb. What they perceive to be a dramatic change in the enforcement policies hasn't manifested sufficiently on the ground. We need the strength of resolve throughout the executive branch, and that includes having the political leadership in place, confirmed in the executive branch agencies, to actually implement policies that are serious about stopping illegal immigration. We need funding. Funding for something like a wall. Now here's the reality in Washington. Congress, I have never seen such partisan division. It is worse than it has ever been. We are seeing a Democratic filibuster of everything, especially when it comes to border security. It's interesting, a number of Democrats are saying, well, a wall costs too much. Now, I do have to point out, this may be the first time in modern history Washington Democrats have thought any government project costs too much. Seems there's money for everything else, but not that. But you know, I was looking at that. At the time, the estimates for the cost of building a wall were between $14 and $20 billion. Same time, I read news reports that said the value of El Chapo, the Mexican drug lord, of his global criminal enterprise, was roughly $14 billion. And there was a natural and elegant symmetry that occurred. So I introduced legislation called the El Chapo Act that says we should take every penny criminally seized from El Chapo, who's in federal custody, and every other drug lord we prosecute, and we ought to use that money to build the wall, to acquire the technology, to get the infrared, to get the planes, to get the drones, to get the helicopters, to hire the Border Patrol agents. We ought to use the billions of dollars that they had made trafficking, narcotics, trafficking human beings across our border, take those billions from them and use them to secure our border. That hadn't had a vote yet in Washington. If it did have a vote, I think it would be a reasonable prediction to say it would be filibustered by the Democrats. How do I know that? Well, I know that because we have had a vote on case law, my legislation, and the Democrats filibustered that. We have had a vote on legislation to ban sanctuary cities and defund them, and the Democrats filibustered that. And in the last budget, when it came down to funding for a wall, the Democrats allowed $1.6 billion but threatened to filibuster anything more than that. So there will be some spending for additional border security, but not remotely what is needed to actually solve the problem. So what should we do? Well, if we're facing a wildly polarized Washington, where anything going up through regular order in the Senate faces a filibuster, I suppose we could go back to our constituents and say it's hopeless, there's nothing that can be done, the problem can never be solved. You know what? The state of Texas, that's not an acceptable answer. I don't think that's an acceptable answer for us to tell our constituents that. So what we ought to do instead, you know, last week, I sat down with the Senate Republicans. Every week we have lunch together every Wednesday. Have what's called the policy lunch, where we discuss different policy issues. Last Wednesday, I laid out an extensive presentation to my colleagues on the Republican side that said, listen, we have a narrow window, about 250 days from now until January 3rd of next year. We need to be delivering results every one of those days. You know, in the last 100 years, we've had unified Republican control of the federal government 4 times. Since World War II, we've had unified control of the federal government, the executive in both houses of Congress, a total of 8 years. 8 years since World War II is how long the Republicans have had unified control. This is a rare moment when we actually have Republican majorities in both houses and a Republican president who would sign Border Patrol legislation. The case I made to my colleagues is we cannot waste this opportunity. We need to be delivering results. That means results on the economic side, like tax reform, like regulatory reform, passing in place legislation that lifts the burdens on job creators and causes the economy. But what I also urge my colleagues to do is use legislative tools, like we did last year, to pass the tax bill. We passed the tax bill on what's called budget reconciliation, which is Washington speak for a legislative vehicle that can't be filibustered. What I've urged my colleagues to do is take up on reconciliation, use the same legislative vehicle we used for the tax cut. Use that to pass in place the El Chapo Act, funding the resources for border security and securing the funding stream from the criminally forfeited assets of drug lords. You want to talk about delivering real and meaningful results for the citizens of Texas and all across this country. That would be a powerful result we could come through and deliver. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if my colleagues are going to go along with that or not. We have some vigorous debates in Washington. Sometimes not everyone is on the same page. But what I can tell you is this. The mission each of you carries out every day is a mission that matters. It's a mission that Texans care about. It's a mission that Americans all across this country care about. I believe we're going to solve this problem. We're going to finally get serious about devoting the resources and finding the political will to solve it. I can't tell you that'll be in the next 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years. But what I can tell you is however long it takes, I give you my word that I will continue to fight each and every day to secure the border, to protect this nation. And that every single day I'm in public office, I give you my solemn word, I will have your back. Thank you.